Good morning. This podcast is part one of a blended learning exercise that you are required to complete as part of your PEQF studies. You know my mantra, we learn to crawl before we can walk, before we can run. And this blended learning, or what's called a flipped classroom approach, has been designed with that in mind. You will learn the law and the codes of practice around pre-arrest stop and search procedures. You'll then scaffold and build on that knowledge by applying what you've learned individually as part of your e-learning and then via group and discussion work in the part 2 face-to-face session next week. This podcast and the learning will focus solely on Section 2 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. I've sent you an email containing some pre-reads, a self-study PowerPoint, YouTube clips for you to critique and 3 stop and search scenarios for you to consider. You'll be required to produce 3 scripts describing exactly the wording you would use prior to carrying out a search for each of those scenarios using the mnemonic Go Wisely. And we'll learn about that in this podcast. In addition, you will also complete 3 5090 forms or 5090 forms, one for each scenario. And I've also sent a second podcast in which I demonstrate how to deliver Go Wisely. All this is explained fully in my email, including the necessary web links and references. But if there's anything you're unsure of, then just give me a call or drop me an email. Yep. Part 2 of the blended learning will take place at the university. During that session, I will deliver a brief PowerPoint, after which you'll present your script in the form of a role play. You will then work in groups of 3 to discuss your observations of the 2 YouTube stop and search clips and feed back to me. We'll have a discussion about the compliance or otherwise of Section 2 of PACE. We will then work through some multiple questions and to test what you've learned. Again, full details are all in the email. So let's begin. This podcast will focus on a key piece of legislation that, in my opinion, is often overlooked by new and experienced officers. The legislation I'm referring to is Section 2 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984 and the accompanying codes of practice, specifically Code A, Section 3.8, and that is part of your reading. This is the law that requires you as police officers to verbally inform a person about certain things before you exercise any pre-arrest stop and search power. Why is it important? It's simply this. Failure to comply with Section 2 of Police and Criminal Evidence Act will render the search unlawful, and any subsequent search of a person may constitute an assault, and the evidence obtained may be inadmissible in court. I can't underestimate the importance of complying with Section 2 of PACE. During your time at the university, you'll have studied stop and search powers and the impact that the use of those powers can have on communities. This podcast isn't going to deal with that. It's just going to focus on responsibilities under Section 2 of PACE. And remember, this power only relates to pre-arrest search powers. The aims of this session, 2 aims. Number 1, examine practical policing skills when attending an incident as a first responder. And secondly, to identify how to comply with Section 2 of PACE and Code A, the codes of practice, prior to exercising any pre-arrest search power. Okay, well, let's start off. Brief introduction. We must remember that as police officers, we can stop and talk to anyone at any time, but they're not obliged to speak to us if they don't want to. Before a police officer searches an individual using pre-arrest search power, so searching them before arrest, the law states the officer must tell that person certain things. What that individual is entitled to be informed of by the searching officer is covered by Section 2 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and Code A 3.8, the Codes of Practice. Those entitlements and provisions have become more commonly known by the mnemonic Go Wisely, G-O-W-I-S-E-L-Y, Go Wisely. And we'll go on to explain what those means. But what you must remember is, as officers, you must tell the person you're about to search each of these things. The G, the O, the W, the I, the S, the E, the L and the Y. Okay, so G, What does the G stand for? You've already covered reasonable grounds in your stop and search learning. So the G is for grounds. Police must have grounds for the search in the first place. It's simple as that. Those grounds must be reasonable. They cannot be based on a hunch. There must be some objectivity to those grounds. These could be from intelligence, a witness, or your own observations. For example, you're called to an area as a witness as they saw a man waving a 6-inch bladed knife at some people about 10 minutes ago in the park. They described the man as white, 6'6", wearing a short-sleeved Argentinian football top with a number 7 on the back of it and lots of tattoos on his arm. You spot a person matching that description in the park. Now that would be sufficient grounds to search them for a knife. Think of what you would say to that person if they said to you, "Why do you intend to search me?" There is an expectation that the requirement of reasonable ground, there is an exception to the reasonable grounds, and that's under Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994. We'll cover that in the face-to-face session. Okay, so that's G, grounds. O is object, and simply this is two things really. You must tell the person who you're about to search what is the object of your search and what is the item you think they may have on them. Think, what would you say if the person said, "What is it you're looking for, officer?" Now, the W, the I and the S, I group these together. And that is the warrant card for the W, the I is your identity, and S is the station to which you're attached. Before searching a person, you must tell that person your identity, i.e. who you are and your collar number and what station you're attached to. If you're in plain clothes, you must also show your warrant card. And this is so even if the person knows you and you know them. The stated case there is Crown versus Bristol, which is in your reading list. E is entitlement to a copy of the search record. This is the form 5090, which you can find on your laptops. The law states the officer must complete a record of the search, and the person is entitled to a copy of that search as soon as practicable or within 3 months at a police station of their choice. Remember, the person search is not obliged to give you any personal details, but you are obliged to complete a search record. L is the legal power, and this is the legal power on which you're intending to carry out a stop and search. The most common one, and you learnt this already, is Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act or Section 23 of the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. But you must tell the person what power you're using. The Y is you are being detained. You must tell the person they're being detained. The search is not voluntary. We don't have voluntary searches. You have the power under law to detain that person for the purpose of a search. So in our example above, concerning the report of the male in the park, what words could we use to comply with Section 2 of PACE? We know the mnemonic is go wisely, but it's better, in my opinion, to deliver that mnemonic in a slightly different order to the G, the O, the W, I, S, and then the E, the L, and the Y. I will suggest that as I stop the man in the park, I will say to him something similar to this. You are being detained for a search under Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. You are not free to leave. I am DC 2432 Stuart Ashton, attached to Paddington Police Station. Here is my warrant card. The grounds for my search is that I've been given information from a member of the public that a person matching your description, i.e. a white male, 6'6" tall, wearing an Argentinian football top with tattoos on his arms, was seen 10 minutes ago in this park waving a 6-inch long bladed knife at some people. I intend to search you to see if you have any offensive weapons on you, and the object I'm looking for is a knife. At the end of the search, you'll be entitled to a copy of the search record either now or within 3 months from the station of your choice. Do you understand what I've said? All of that covers the go wisely points. Now, things to remember. You can use reasonable force to detain the person for the purpose of the search and use reasonable force to carry out the search. Metropolitan Police policy says that you must have your body-worn video on whilst conducting a stop and search, and all the go wisely should be recorded. Failure to deliver all the relevant parts of go wisely will render the search unlawful. This may mean that it's possible that any evidence found during the unlawful search may be classed as inadmissible. It could also mean that the search could constitute an assault and that anyone resisting that search would not be obstructing an officer in the course of their duty. The self-study that I've set you will build on that knowledge. There's some set reading, 2 stately cases to consider, 3 stop and search scenarios, and I'll require you to complete a Form 5090. I've also attached 2 YouTube clips so you can have a look at police in action in real life and critique that. Yeah. Any problems, just call me or email me. Thank you.